Tonight, we drift into a tale born not from greed alone, but from shimmering belief, a story carried on mountain wind, where sunlight touched sacred waters and devotion glittered brighter than any treasure. Long before explorers whispered of a golden kingdom, there were the Muisca people, high in the Andes, honoring the dawn with offerings of brilliance and prayer. Gold to them was not wealth, it was light, a gift to the divine, not a crown for mortal kings. Yet when distant travelers first heard of a ruler covered in gold dust, shining like the morning sun as he stepped into a sacred lake, they saw not ceremony, but riches unending. From a single ritual, the world imagined a kingdom drenched in gold, and thus El Dorado was born, not in truth, but in longing. Before we begin, tell me gently, what do you usually do to help yourself drift into sleep? A warm drink, soft music, a quiet thought. I would love to know when your heart feels ready to share. And if these peaceful journeys through myth and ancient memory bring rest to your nights, feel welcome to subscribe, so this quiet corner may remain a place where stories breathe softly in the dark. In the beginning, there was only whisper and road, trails winding through emerald mountains, breath thin in the high air, sun rising gold through veils of mist. Travelers moved slowly along stone paths laid by ancient feet, driven not by conquest but by curiosity, trade, and prayer. They carried salt from distant valleys, emeralds wrapped in woven cloth, and stories older than memory. Among them walked messengers of the Muisca, voices soft as morning wind, bearing knowledge that flowed like quiet rivers between snow-kissed peaks and sacred lakes. They did not speak of kingdoms made entirely of gold. They spoke, instead of light, of a leader newly chosen, who, upon taking his place before gods and ancestors, would be covered in fine gold dust that clung to skin like dawn clings to horizon. They spoke of that leader stepping into still water, shining like living sun. And to them, it was not wealth. It was prayer, devotion, a shimmering promise between world and spirit. But far from those mountains, sails filled by hunger crossed seas, bearing men whose hearts beat not for ritual but for riches. They came first to valleys where stone temples rose, where delicate ornaments glimmered upon altars, where gold rested not in vaults but in shrines. They learned quickly that gold existed in these lands, not hoarded but honored. And when they asked where more might lie, they received not directions but stories. Stories of a ruler who glimmered, stories of offerings given to lake and sky. Stories of gold falling like sunlight into sacred waters. The wind carried those tales across campfires and jungle clearings, into the ears of men whose armor gleamed but whose hearts held shadows. They imagined temple walls laden with gold sheets, streets paved in shimmering metal, crowns heavy enough to bend the neck of kings. They pictured a place where rivers ran bright and hills flashed like fire. The truth, quiet, sacred, humble, slipped like a single drop into an ocean of ambition. And so the seed was planted. Before steel ever touched the Andes, before hooves trampled fields and foreign prayers echoed across mountaintops, the story lived softly among the Muisca, a gentle tale of devotion, never meant to fuel greed. Yet when first spoken through foreign tongues, it took shape like mist becoming storm. Explorers moved deeper into unfamiliar land, guided by those who traded kindness for caution. They climbed ridges where condors soared, their breath turning white in cold air. They crossed rivers that murmured secrets beneath ancient boughs. At night, they sat near fires, staring at stars that once led Polynesian navigators across oceans, now watching silent as new dreamers traced constellations in hope of gold. They asked again and again, "Where is the city of gold?" But no answer spoke of cities, only of lakes, of ritual, of a chief gilded not by wealth but by faith. Yet desire reshapes truth. For every soft explanation given, the listeners heard only shimmer. When told of a ceremony, they imagined a crown. When told of offerings cast into water, they pictured vaults waiting beneath waves. When told of a gilded body glowing with sacred powder, They created an entire kingdom where walls glowed like sun and streets echoed with the sound of unimaginable wealth. Word traveled faster than footsteps, faster than rivers, faster than reason. Whispers reached distant ears in mountains, in jungles, across ports where ships moored heavy with fevered hope. Some came to trade, many came to take. A land once known for harmony of water and spirit became map marked by longing, a dream pursued by those who could not hear its quiet heart. Meanwhile, the Muisca continued their rhythm. Dawn chants echoed over valleys soft with fog. Farmers tended terraces carved with patience. Gold dust was ground, not to adorn mortal pride, but to become light offered back to sky. Children learned stories of the lake where gods listened, where the world was renewed in ritual and reflection. No one there imagined that their sacred rite would become a distant fever, growing hotter with each retelling. When the first armored figures reached the high plateaus, they arrived breathless and bruised by journey, yet shining with expectation. Their eyes scanned lakes as though scanning horizon for sunrise. They asked villagers again, where is the golden land? Where stands the shining city? Where sleeps the king of gold? The Muisca answered once more, he rises from water, not throne. He shines only for moments, not forever. He gives gold to the gods, he does not keep it. His wealth is not possession, but offering. His glory is not hoard, but humility. Such answers baffled men who measured power by accumulation rather than surrender. They saw ritual and imagined riches hidden beyond reach. They saw sacred gesture and believed it disguise. They believed that if gold was thrown into lake, greater gold must lie somewhere beyond, a treasure no prayer could justify, no spirit could contain. So they cut paths through dense forest. They marched through cold mountain passes where breath thinned and frost kissed their steel. Some moved south, others east, each believing that just beyond next ridge, next river bend, next valley, a kingdom forged of sun awaited their arrival. Behind them, the mountains remained quiet, not triumphant, not defeated, simply eternal. Lakes reflected sky as if nothing changed. The Muisca continued to honor sun with powdered gold and song. Their world did not glitter for greed, it glowed for spirit. The myth that would shake continents had begun not with deception, but with devotion. Not with empire, but with prayer. Not with the hunger of gods, but with reverence for light. Yet stories, once released, travel in ways no one can guide. They settle into hearts shaped by hope or by hunger. And from that soil, they grow forms their tellers never intended. So as dawn poured across the high plateau and touched the surface of Lake Guatavita like fingers of fire on still water, the Muisca sang softly, gold dust rising like breath, a chief preparing to become light once more. And somewhere far beyond, strangers sharpened blades and dreams alike, believing they chased a kingdom rather than a ritual, a crown rather than humility, a city rather than a single heartbeat of gold upon water. Thus, a legend was born, not in truth, but in misunderstanding, in wish, in the fragile bridge between devotion and desire. And like all legends carried by longing, it would move mountains and men alike, one quiet misunderstanding at a time. The story traveled not only by mouth, but by thirst, a thirst that lived inside men whose worlds had taught them that glory belonged to those who seized, not to those who offered. In distant halls across the sea, where torches flickered against stone and maps lay unfurled like dreams stretched across parchment, a single whisper of gold could stir ambition like wind stirs embers. They spoke of lands where the sun kissed mountains and turned water to shimmering veil. They spoke of people who adorned their skin with powdered radiance, who gently placed gold into lakes as though returning breath to the sky. And as each tale passed from sailor to noble to soldier, its shape swelled, not from truth, but from longing. Soon, El Dorado was no longer a man. It became a place, a valley where gold lay upon earth like fallen leaves, a city where rooftops glimmered like sunrise, a kingdom hidden behind jungle veil and cloud-wrapped peaks. Some imagined temples whose walls shone brighter than any cathedral's altar. Others pictured rivers that carried flecks of gold like stars drifting through water. Wonder softened into obsession. Curiosity hardened into resolve. And somewhere, across rolling sea, armor gleamed as men traced routes across maps, believing that between mountains and forests breathed a prize vast enough to rewrite destiny. Their ships shook with waves, but their hearts remained still with certainty. El Dorado was real, and they would find it. They arrived in the new world breathless with expectation, stepping from deck to soil as though stepping into prophecy. The land greeted them not with golden gates, but with towering jungle, rivers that roared like ancient spirits, heat thick as mist, and insects humming where gold did not glitter. Yet they pressed forward, for myth once born rarely dies quietly. Their questions to those who lived there came not as gentle curiosity, but as hunger disguised as inquiry. "Where is the Golden King?" they asked. "Where lies the city of gold?" The people answered again with quiet truth. "There is no golden city. There is only ceremony, a man covered in gold dust offering to the gods. But men who chased crowns do not hear humility, they hear only promise, and when the promise does not unfold in plain sight, they reshape truth to suit desire." So each answer became a signpost to somewhere else. If gold did not lie here, then it must lie there, beyond the next ridge, past the next river, across another stretch of shadowed green. Everyone pointed somewhere different, not in deception, but in memory's gentle uncertainty. Yet the seekers, mistaking uncertainty for cunning, only became more convinced that the treasure waited just beyond reach, so they marched deeper into lands that breathed heat and mystery. Their boots sank into mud. Mosquitoes sang around them as if warning, rain fell heavy and sudden, and vines coiled across paths like guardians of forgotten worlds. Sweat traced their brows, and hunger crept into their bones. They crossed mountains veiled in cloud where wind howled through stones like distant laughter. They entered valleys lush and silent, where parrots watched from branches and monkeys called from canopy. Nights came thick and humid, filled with the hum of unseen life. Fires flickered small beneath vast sky, stars staring down at steel and ambition. Some asked themselves, in quiet hours between March and dawn, whether gold worth such suffering truly existed. But pride is heavier than exhaustion, and dreams once ignited cannot be easily extinguished, so they pressed onward. Every villager they met was asked again, their answers twisting more under pressure not of truth, but of fear or confusion. One spoke of gold across distant hills, only meaning ritual, not riches. Another pointed toward mountains not in promise, but simply because mountains were sacred places. Another gestured toward lakes shimmering like mirrors, believing the question sought holy sites, not imagined kingdoms. Each gesture became a direction. Each word became a prophecy, and the legend grew wind again. Some expeditions ended quietly, in return to coast empty-handed, filled with weary breaths and haunted eyes. Others did not return at all. They vanished into the dense embrace of forest, their armor swallowed by vines, their voices drowned by rivers that cared nothing for gold or longing. Yet failure did not slow belief. Every loss only proved to those who remained that the legend must be deeper, richer, more elusive. The harder it was to find, the more they believed in its brilliance. Meanwhile, far in the highlands, the Muisca continued their ways. Dawn touched sacred lakes, and chiefs still stepped into water dusted in sunlight. Gold scattered across surface like stars cast gently into night sky. Each offering rose not in greed, but in gratitude. Gold was not wealth, it was prayer returned to earth. But across valleys, shadows lengthened, not from cloud, but from arrival. Footsteps reached villages uninvited. Foreign words filled spaces once held by song. Curious eyes studied homes and temples not with wonder for culture, but with calculation. And still they asked, "Where is the gold?" The people pointed toward lakes again, toward mountains, toward light. They meant spirit. The seekers heard treasure. And each misunderstanding widened the space between worlds that once could have shared horizon in peace. Riders galloped across plateaus, armor clattering like restless thunder. Canoes cut through rivers, paddles stirring water that reflected only sky. Men plunged deeper into jungle, carving paths not meant to be carved, breaking branches that once sheltered quiet gods. And always, they imagined gold waiting just beyond vision. El Dorado, once a ceremony of devotion, now lived as a phantom city, a shining false horizon no one could reach. It became both promise and curse, a dream heavy enough to drown, yet bright enough to haunt every waking thought. Even nature seemed to whisper warning. Birds flew overhead in restless flocks, clouds rolled thick along mountainsides, rivers swelled as if guarding secrets beneath their silver skins. But men who chased sun in metal saw not signs, only obstacles. Night after night, campfires burned low. Men whispered that tomorrow they would find it. Tomorrow they would reach the valley of golden walls. Tomorrow, hunger would turn to triumph, fever to fortune, suffering to glory. Tomorrow always lived one valley farther, yet dawn revealed only endless green, endless mountains, endless sky. The world had offered them ritual, they demanded empire. The land had offered them beauty, they sought glitter. The people had offered them truth, they carved myth instead. And somewhere, on a quiet morning beside still waters, a Muisca elder cast gold dust to the wind and watched it shimmer above the lake like a living halo. He did not know that beyond these hills, strangers marched with hearts burning hotter than sun, chasing the reflection instead of the light. For legends, once born, seldom remain gentle. They grow teeth, they grow hunger, they lead men farther than they ever meant to go. And in the high Andes, where mist clings to stone and the sky rests close enough to touch, the story of El Dorado had already become something no one could call back. A dream too bright to see clearly, a promise too tempting to surrender, a myth that would shape destinies not through gold, but through longing unbearably vast. Before gold became a rumor that stirred continents, before foreign maps etched mountain ridges with trembling hope, there existed only a quiet ceremony beneath the sky. A ritual shaped by hands that believed light could be held, if only for a moment, and returned to the world in gratitude. In the high valleys of the Andes, where clouds travel low enough to brush the cheek and lakes lie still like mirrors placed by gods, the Muisca people gathered in reverence. Their world did not glitter with palaces or crowns. Their wealth lived in fertile terraces, in emerald grass bending under morning dew, in the rhythm of seasons that blessed and tested in equal measure. And above all in sunlight, for to them, the sun was not a distant fire in the sky. It was life given voice, warmth given shape, divinity that touched earth each dawn with gentle gold. When a new ruler rose among them, he did not claim power by sword or throne. He stepped into a sacred calling born from service, not dominance, from humility, not hunger. And as first light crept across the sky, the people prepared to honor the bond between heaven and earth. On the slope above Lake Guatavita, elders moved like shadows through the soft hush of dawn, their cloaks brushed by cold wind that carried the faint scent of earth and lake water. Young attendants gathered powdered gold, not mined in greed, but formed in ritual, ground fine as pollen. The dust shimmered in woven baskets, pale and luminous, as though light had been captured, sifted, and made tangible through prayer. As the sun rose, drums whispered low, rhythm steady as a heartbeat. Not a march, not a war cry, but a pulse. Women sang beside the water, voices gentle as breath, their chants rising from lips like mist rising from lake. Each word honored ancestors. Each tone offered reverence to the unseen. And in that stillness, the soon-to-be ruler stepped forward. He was not adorned in armor, nor draped in robes heavy with metal. He stood bare to wind and dawn, his feet grounded in soil, his skin touched by the chill of morning. Attendants approached and lifted their hands, and the gold began to descend upon him. Dust settled across shoulders, neck, forehead, chest, cascading like sunlight poured from mountain peak. It clung to sweat and oil, turning skin to living sunrise. Slowly, his form transformed. Flesh became radiance. Mortal shape became embodiment of divine breath. He did not glow in arrogance, but in offering. The gold was not crown, it was prayer. And when the last handful of dust touched his skin, silence fell. Even the wind paused. Even the birds seemed to wait. He walked toward the lake, each step measured, each breath steady, as though he moved not through space, but through time itself. The water at Guatavita lay still, unbroken, reflecting sky as though holding another world beneath its surface. The ruler reached the edge, then stepped into the water, gold shimmering across his skin like dawn drifting on waves. He waded deeper until the lake embraced him to the chest. The cold did not shake him. The weight of ritual steadied his limbs. Behind him, people knelt in reverence, heads bowed. They did not watch to admire. They watched to remember, for this moment did not belong to ruler alone. It belonged to all who breathed this land, to all who honored the sun and the ancestors who guided them across mountain paths and through generations of quiet strength. Then came the offerings. Priests approached the water's edge with baskets and jars filled not with riches, but with symbols of gratitude. Gold figurines shaped as birds, frogs, sun discs, and human forms. Beads carved from emerald and stone. Crafted beauty meant not to display, but to surrender. Objects given not to earth as payment, but to spirit as homage. One by one, they cast offerings into the lake. Figures sank slowly, catching last glimmers of sunlight before slipping into sacred depth. Each offering a heartbeat returned to sky. Each sun disk a piece of dawn placed gently into darkness, trusting it would rise again in new form. The ruler extended his hands beneath the water, gold dissolving from skin like light melting into reflection. It did not cling, it surrendered. A shimmer spread across the surface, rippling outward, dispersing into lake as though returning to source, all radiance reclaimed by the world that gave it. And when the gold was gone from his skin, he stood not diminished, but renewed, a man once adorned in divine light, now humbled, cleansed, and ready to lead not by possession, but by service. The ritual was not meant to glorify him, it was meant to purify him. Power did not rise from taking. It rose from giving. Slowly he returned to shore. Attendants wrapped him in woven cloth, yet it was the water that clothed him in sanctity. Villagers touched the earth in reverence. The drums resumed, soft again, steady, ancient. The ceremony had no roar, no proclamation, no declaration of conquest. It moved like a prayer, gentle, radiant, certain. And when it ended, the lake lay still, gold dust beneath its surface like stars sleeping in water. Only those who understood looked upon this sight and saw wealth. Others, arriving centuries later, would see treasure lost. But in this moment, it was not treasure, it was faith. The ruler looked across gathered faces, children blinking in awe, elders breathing calm as mountain stone, artisans with hands calloused from clay and reed and fire. His gaze held not pride, but responsibility. He did not rise to rule above them. He rose to carry them, to protect the balance that bound sky, water, land, and spirit. Then, slowly, the people dispersed. Fields awaited planting, looms awaited thread. Life flowed onward, unbroken by ritual, strengthened by it. For the ceremony was not spectacle. It was rhythm, a turning of cycle as necessary as sunrise itself. And across the valley, where sunlight touched stone and grasses swayed in soft breeze, no one imagined that distant men would one day hear this story and reshape it into hunger too bright to see through. For here, gold had been returned to water like breath returned to sky. And nothing about it belonged to desire, only to devotion. This was the truth behind El Dorado, a ritual, a prayer in light, a king gilded not to keep but to give, a ceremony meant to echo sunrise, brilliant for a moment, then humbly fading into day. long after the last ripple faded from Lake Guatavita, and the golden dust settled into its depths like dream starlight. The valley softened into ordinary day once more. The sun hung quiet above the ridges, watching fields breathe beneath it. Villagers moved along terraces, their steps light, as though some glow still lingered in the air. And in every heart there lay a quiet certainty. The bond between earth and sky had been renewed, the ancestors honored, and the world set gently back into balance. Children ran through grass, still cool from morning, dipping fingers into the lake's edge as if searching for remnants of light. They could not grasp gold, only the shimmering memory of it. But memory was enough. Stories lived not only in metal, but in breath and witness. Elders sat near reeds and murmured soft explanations to young ears, reminding them that true treasure was not held, but given. The dust beneath the water was not wealth lost. It was devotion resting, sacred and unseen, for the Muisca did not need proof of their offering. The lake held their promise, the sky carried their faith, and the mountain air wrapped them in quiet approval. To live in balance with gods and world was treasure enough. Their gold remained where it belonged, beneath water, where human hands could not reclaim what had been surrendered to spirit. Yet devotion has weight, and where one culture sees holiness, another may see opportunity. As moons passed and seasons turned, small rumors drifted beyond high valleys like birds caught by unpredictable wind. Travelers carried stories to villages along distant rivers. Traders recited what they had heard in markets shaded by woven cloth, voices low as if discussing sacred subject. They spoke not only of a ruler gilded in gold, but of gold that touched water, gold that sank, gold that rested in sacred depths. They did not speak greedily, they spoke with awe. But awe, when carried far enough from its source, can harden into misunderstanding. And among those who heard, some hearts beat not with reverence, but with hunger sharpened by ambition. So while the people of the highlands continued to till soil, to weave cloth, to place offerings of emerald and metal beside ancestral shrines, distant men traced rivers and peaks upon maps and whispered promises into each other's ears. They imagined that, beneath a quiet lake lay untold wealth. Not sacred tokens, but fortune. Not offerings, but hoarded treasure awaiting fearless hands. Yet even as myth took root far from the ceremony's truth, the Muisca returned to the lake each generation, never altering the sacred rhythm. New rulers rose. New dawns welcomed shimmering bodies into water. The gold returned to depths, not as loss, but as gift. Sunlight always comes back, so too must gold. That was their wisdom, as simple and vast as sky. Seasons shifted. Crops flourished and thinned with rain's grace. Families grew and rested in ancestral earth. Sometimes drought tested patience. Sometimes harvest overflowed. In winter nights, fires crackled beneath stars sharp as obsidian points, and elders recited the story again, tying young hearts to memory, teaching them that power lay not in holding the world, but in trusting it. Then came footfalls from beyond the horizon. Foreign travelers reached nearby valleys first, weary from travel, armor tarnished by heat and humidity. They saw not sacred land, but possibility. They asked for water and food, and villagers offered with courtesy, though wary. They rested in shade, eyes drifting toward mountains. They listened when stories of the gilded chief were told, not with reverence, but with calculation. The ritual, once gentle as morning mist, took new shape in minds unused to surrender. Where the Muisca saw renewal, these men saw promise. Where the Muisca saw gift, they saw vault. They could not imagine that a people would release gold freely. To them, only need or danger could explain such surrender. Thus they reasoned, if gold was offered once, more must remain below, endless and waiting. The lake, meanwhile, lay calm as always. It held memory, but not malice. It held offerings, but not ownership. Its stillness had no interest in desire. Wind rippled across the surface. Birds dipped low for insects. Children played on shore, laughing with simple joy, unaware that far beyond sight, men sharpened vision upon their home. In time, metal tools glinted near the lake's edge, not in Muisca hands, but in hands that trembled with impatience. They studied the basin, its curve carved like bowl made by gods. They traced pathways with eyes trained to measure and scheme. They did not kneel, nor did they whisper prayers. They walked with certainty, as though land owed them revelation. Still, for a while, nothing changed. Curiosity watched, but did not yet act. The Muisca continued their rituals, and foreigners moved onward, believing greater treasure lay elsewhere. Yet word spread, and each passing tongue polished legend brighter until it gleamed too fiercely to ignore. When strangers returned, they came not as quiet wanderers, but as seekers certain of right. They brought ropes and tools, laborers and ambition. They gazed at the lake as though looking upon a sealed chest, not a sacred heart. They sought to lower water, to breach what they imagined was barrier, to uncover what prayers had placed beneath. The ceremony's spirit had drifted so far from their minds that they no longer saw holiness at all, only possibility. Villagers watched from distance, helpless as devotion became target. Some wept softly in reeds, their tears falling into soil beside ancient footsteps. Others stood in silence, hands clasped, not in fear but in sorrow. No anger burned, only ache, for how could those who never saw the sun on water understand? The lake, patient as always, surrendered only what it wished. Machinery groaned, soil collapsed in places. Water receded and returned like breath. Gold emerged rarely, fragile and sacred, shaped like birds, like sun disks, like memories of light. To foreigners, these pieces were proof. To the Muisca, they were wounds. Yet even then, the ceremony did not die. When the strangers left, breathless with small fragments of myth, the people returned when dawn next called. New gold was ground. New leader walked ashore. Light touched skin again, soft and pure, defying greed, because true ritual cannot be stolen. It lives not in object, but in meaning. The lake received gold once more, gentle as sigh, quiet as prayer. And in its depths, beneath silt and time, thousands of years of offerings rested not as treasure, but as memory, each grain a whisper to gods, each figurine a story of a people who believed in giving light back to sky. Far away, men built empires of rumor upon those grains. But here, in this valley, nothing changed except seasons. The ceremony continued in stillness, as eternal as sunrise. For gold only blinds those who chase it. For those who return it to the world, it becomes peace. To understand the legend of El Dorado, one must first understand the land that cradled it, a world lifted into the sky, where earth and cloud touched like two hands joined in prayer. The Muisca homeland did not shimmer in endless gold. It breathed in mist and emerald hills, in lakes that held eternity in their stillness, and in mountains so ancient they seemed to hum with memory. This was a kingdom of sky, not metal, a realm shaped by wind and water, not by wealth. High upon the eastern Andes, the land unfolded in terraces of green. Valleys stretched like gentle bowls carved by the patient hands of gods, holding villages and fields in quiet balance. The air here felt thinner, sharper, each breath a reminder that life grew close to heaven. Clouds drifted low across plains, brushing tall grasses that swayed like silver threads beneath morning light. Sunlight spilled across slopes in soft sheets, laying warmth upon fields where maize and potatoes rooted deep into volcanic soil. Rivers did not roar in fury, they murmured in stone channels, guiding water through cultivated earth like veins carrying life beneath skin. Spring-fed streams traced delicate paths between villages, winding past clay dwellings and ceremonial plazas, carrying reflection instead of rage. When rain fell, it came as blessing, feeding crops and filling sacred lakes that lay still as polished mirrors between steep ridges. The land breathed in rhythm, gentle and assured. Hidden among these hills were waters older than any kingdom, lakes so quiet they seemed carved from memory itself. To the Muisca, these lakes were thresholds, places where sky dipped into earth and the divine could listen. Guatavita shone among them, cradled by slopes that held it like a bowl of silence. Its waters caught sunrise in trembling gold, not because of treasure, but because the world here knew how to hold light with reverence. Beyond Guatavita, other waters slept beneath sky. Iguac, where legends whispered of a goddess emerging with a child in her arms to seed humanity. Fuqueen, its surface silver at dusk. Tota, wide and deep as eternity's reflection. Each held story, each held spirit, each belonged not to ambition but to sacred memory carved in ripples and reeds. Villages rose not as walls and battlements, but as circles of life. Homes made of earth and cane stood low against wind, their roofs thatched like nests, humble yet warm. Smoke curled from small hearths in early morning, carrying scent of maize cakes and broth rich with herbs gathered from mountain slopes. Children padded barefoot across packed soil, faces turned toward sun like flowers. Elderly figures sat near doorways, weaving, grinding corn, watching the world with eyes made gentle by the long passage of seasons. Crops arranged in thoughtful rows hugged ridges and terraces, framed by stone borders set by patient hands. The land did not give without care, and so the Muisca tended it not as masters, but as stewards. Each seed carried prayer, each harvest carried gratitude. The soil, dark and fertile, fed not empire but community, fields wide enough for sustenance, narrow enough to remind hearts of humility. Paths wound through this high world like quiet veins, linking village to village, lake to lake, shrine to horizon. They did not demand speed, they invited reflection. Footsteps made music with gravel, and winds greeted travelers with fingertips cool as mountain spring. Pilgrims walked these paths not in haste, but in reverence, offering coca leaves to spirits, pausing to greet the world as one greets an elder, with quiet respect. Forests grew in sheltered valleys, dense and ancient, the canopies whispering secrets older than any kingdom carved from gold or stone. Orchids clung to branches, roots wrapped like careful fingers around bark. Birds with emerald feathers darted through mist like jewels carried by air. Jaguars prowled unseen, patient as time, their breath lost in shadows. Here the world spoke in hushed tones, as if not to disturb the mountains that watched over everything with solemn grace. At higher elevations, grasses stretched wide, pale and windswept, bending to breathe of sky. Frailejones stood like guardians, soft-leaved, tall, crowned with golden blooms that echoed the sun's blessing. Their presence was sacred, holding moisture in their thick stems, releasing it slowly so rivers and lakes would never hunger. Life here did not rush, it endured. Across the plateau, emerald veins seeped through stone, a gift from earth that glowed not with blinding brilliance, but with gentle mystery. Emeralds lay hidden in rock like drops of condensed starlight, cherished not for conquest, but for ceremony, for offering, for meaning beyond trade. They shimmered like dew caught in first morning rays, quiet and holy. When night arrived, it did so in silence deep as eternity. The sky above the Andes revealed stars like sparks flung from creation's first breath. Constellations guided memory and myth alike, lines drawn between worlds, stories etched across black velvet sky. Fires glowed in village courtyards, shadows danced against woven walls, and elders spoke softly of lakes that cradle spirit, of sun that breathes life into earth, of ancestors walking through dreams to bless the living. There were no palaces here, no citadels carved for conquest. Only temples raised from earth, places where priests chanted at dawn and dusk, where pottery vessels held offerings of maize beer, where feathers, shells, and gold objects pulsed with sacred meaning upon stone. In these places, the world felt close, sky leaning toward land, land rising toward sky, devotion binding them like thread of sunlight. This was the realm of the Muisca, not a kingdom of glittering walls, but a cradle of balance held aloft in mountains. a place where breath met cloud, where life met ritual, where the world moved not in the chase of treasure, but in the dance of reverence and earth's eternal rhythm. The myth of El Dorado did not rise from greed here. It rose from altitude, from morning mist curling over sacred water, from sunlight shimmering upon a man who offered himself to spirit. Those who lived here sought not gold to hold, but light to praise. And in the hush of dawn, when the lake held sunrise in trembling gold, even the sky seemed to listen. In the quiet tapestry of the high Andes, days followed one another like beads on a sacred thread. The sun rose from behind mountain silhouettes, spilling warmth into valleys still heavy with night's breath. Shadows retreated softly, fading across terraces, through groves of frailejones, over stone shrines dusted with morning frost. Each dawn carried continuity, a reminder that the land did not hurry, nor did the hearts that lived upon it. Paths traced from one settlement to the next were not conquerors' roads, but lifelines, narrow dirt ribbons worn smooth by generations of footsteps. They wound through grasslands, across bridges made of woven fibers, along ridges where wind whispered secrets only the mountains could understand. Travelers walked not with urgency, but with patience, as though each step itself was a prayer offered to earth and sky. From these paths, villages appeared slowly, never abrupt, always belonging. Round huts made from clay and woven cane rested close to one another, grouped like kin seeking warmth in the mountain air. Smoke rose from hearths with the gentle certainty of breath. Dogs slept curled near doorways. Chickens pecked at grain scattered in soft dust. Children played near ponds, tracing spirals in mud, chasing dragonflies across reeds. The rhythm of life here did not hinge on conquest or wealth, but on cycles, sowing, tending, harvesting, spinning, weaving, remembering. Fields glowed with maize and quinoa. Potatoes grew in patchwork beds, their leaves trembling in morning air. Canals carried water from hilltop springs, and farmers listened to the land as one listens to an elder, with humility, with gratitude, with the understanding that life is borrowed, never owned. To the east, where mountains dipped toward jungles, clouds gathered like drifting spirits. The land softened into lush valleys, alive with birdsong and orchids as bright as dawn. Rivers braided themselves through trees, their waters speaking in low rumble and gentle splash. These rivers carried memory, not gold, yet in their clarity lay wealth deeper than any metal, for they fed soil, filled lakes, and drew life upward through roots and stalks and fruit. To the west, the world fell away into deeper heights, stone rising sharp and ancient. Peaks fractured sky with jagged crowns, their rock flanks streaked with lichens and moss. Wind whistled along cliffs, cold and ancient as starlight. Above these heights, condors drifted, their wings tracing slow circles of reverence in thin air. They watched everything, villages waking, fields breathing, lakes shimmering like forgotten mirrors, guardians not of territory, but of spirit. And among these mountains lay sacred lakes beyond Guatavita. Lakes that seemed carved from silence, held in contours of stone older than memory itself. Their shores were offerings in themselves, places where priests burned incense of resin and leaf, where emeralds caught light before sinking beneath water, where the world thinned between seen and unseen. Here, the wind often paused, as if the world held its breath in respect. Night in these highlands came not abruptly, but gently, like a cloak drawn across the shoulders of day. First, shadows lengthened, stretching across terraces like soft brushes of ink. Then colors faded, greens darkening, blues deepening, earth tones sinking into dusk. Finally, the horizon softened and stars scattered themselves across sky, as though thrown by a patient and loving hand. Fires kindled in courtyards and communal spaces. Flames flickered against smooth clay walls, casting silhouettes that moved like living spirits across woven mats. Women ground maize into flour, the sound steady as heartbeat. Men repaired nets, shaped tools, prepared offerings for morning rituals. Elders recited creation stories. Each word carried slow and low, settling into ears like seeds into soil. Above, constellations traced patterns sacred to memory. The Muisca did not gaze upward seeking conquest of stars. They looked to sky to remember place, to understand season, to recognize when rain would come or when frost would threaten crops. The heavens were a guidebook written not in hunger, but in reverence. To read them was not ambition, it was prayer in this world. Gold gleamed not in vaults or towers, but in sunlight on water, in pollen on flower, in the quiet dust that adorned a ruler once in a generation. It was not common, nor rare. It simply existed as part of life's sacred breath, a reminder that the sun reached earth not only with light, but with meaning. Yet far beyond these valleys, the world churned in turmoil, seas crossed by ships chasing rumor, maps spread across tables in distant lands, bishops and captains and kings murmuring promises over parchment. Their world valued glitter more than grace, conquest more than memory. They searched for what they believed lay hidden, when in truth, nothing was hidden. Gold was here in plain sight, offered to sky, not claimed by man. When foreign boots first touched the edges of Muisca land, they stepped into a world shaped by devotion rather than desire. They climbed paths that had known only bare feet and sandals woven from fiber and reed. They gazed upon fields that fed communities rather than armies. They watched lakes shimmer in sunrise, heard wind move through frailejones, saw children laugh in morning light. Yet they did not ask what these things meant. They asked only where the gold was kept. They looked at the land and saw not sanctuary, but clue. Mountains became obstacles, not temples. Lakes became vaults, not holy waters. Villages became waypoints to a kingdom that did not exist. They saw richness, yet missed wealth. They saw soil, yet missed spirit. They saw offering, yet missed prayer. But for a time, the world remained as it had always been for the Muisca. Seasons continued. Rituals endured. Lakes reflected sky as though eternity sat upon their surface. The land still breathed in quiet rhythm, unbothered by the whispers that rose beyond its peaks. And in the hush of pre-dawn, when mist draped across fields and birds began their first shy song, the earth seemed to speak in sighs of memory. This land did not need gold to shine. Its light came from altitude, from ancestry, from patience, from wind and water and humble devotion. To live here was not to chase glory, but to belong. To belong was not to conquer, but to listen. And those who listened heard a truth as old as mountain stone, that wealth measured by the sun is eternal, and wealth measured by possession dissolves like dew in morning light. The whispers of a gilded king moved farther than any wind the Andes had ever known. Across oceans where sails billowed like restless wings, across harbors crowded with ambition and salt, across stone palaces where candles flickered before watchful eyes, the rumor traveled, soft at first, then burning bright, not as prayer but as promise. In distant halls where strategy and hunger shared the same breath, the legend took shape like a storm forming over still water. Men who had tasted conquest in foreign kingdoms, who carried memories of temples stripped and cities undone, now turned their gaze toward the interior of a land not yet mapped, not yet bent beneath foreign will. And always, their thoughts shimmered gold. They had seen riches in other worlds, ornaments taken from temples, gold pounded thin across shields, jewels set in crowns of rulers who once stood proud but fell beneath steel. Yet these treasures, once unimaginable, no longer filled their hunger. Wealth once won becomes expectation, and expectation breeds deeper desire. They whispered of a new world of gold, not in fragments but in rivers, not in ornaments but in cities, not in altar offerings but in mountains filled with metal, and so they marched. Through jungle where vines hung heavy like serpents asleep, through heat that clung to armor and seeped into bone, through air thick with insects and fever, through rivers that coiled like green serpents across the land. They pressed on, as though each footstep could wear down fate itself. Their eyes looked not to beauty, but to horizon, always searching for shimmer. Men led horses across paths where horses had never walked, hooves sinking into earth soft as breath. Soldiers carried weapons that glinted in sunlight, tools meant for war more than wilderness. Their boots crushed flowers whose names they did not know. Their hands brushed aside leaves broad as shields without noticing their veins, their beauty, their fragrance. The world around them pulsed with life, yet they saw only the dream ahead. When rains came, they marched through them. Water slid down armor and filled boots, soaked packs blurred vision. When rivers swelled, they crossed, clinging to logs, pushing rafts against currents powerful as memory. When cliffs rose like great stone guardians, they climbed, fingers digging into jagged rock, breath burning against cold wind. Hunger gnawed, fever whispered, insects stung, and still they advanced. For dreams woven from desire do not unravel easily in hidden clearings. They paused only long enough to catch breath, to rest horses trembling with exhaustion, to eat meager stores. At night, beneath unfamiliar constellations, they slept lightly, one hand always near blade or musket. Their dreams shimmered not with stars but with imagined gold, piles of it, bowls of it, statues of it. They saw cities shining like dawn, kings adorned in radiant metal, lakes holding wealth beyond measure. They dreamed not of mountains or rivers or sky, but of glittering treasure rising like mirage from earth. This dream sustained them more than bread or courage. It was fire. It was hunger shaped into hope. It was belief sharpened into blade. Yet as they moved deeper into land untouched by their footsteps, the world remained itself, quiet, sacred, vast. Lakes lay still, forests breathed, wind traveled across silent ridges. No golden walls appeared, no spires gleamed. The only gold lay in leaves kissed by sunrise, in pollen floating on breeze, in offerings hidden beneath sacred waters that they did not yet find. Along the way, they encountered villages where life followed ancient rhythm. They saw people grinding maize, weaving cloth, tending fires. They saw children running barefoot, elders watching mountains with patient eyes. Everything here moved at a pace shaped by nature, not obsession. Yet when they asked where gold lay, those they questioned spoke of ceremony, of sacred lakes, of leaders bathed in shimmering dust, of offerings cast into water. They spoke truth, but truth can be misheard when ambition listens. The seekers took these words not as wisdom, but as map. They traced rivers they believed flowed toward riches. They climbed plateaus where they thought cities must rest. Every gesture, every story, every uncertain pointing hand became path. And the deeper they went, the more distant their goal seemed, like a phantom always drifting just beyond reach. Some faltered. Men collapsed from heat, from fever, from wounds carved by thorns, from exhaustion too deep to voice. Horses stumbled and fell. Supplies dwindled. Yet pride held them upright. Pride and hope interwoven like roots beneath the soil, for to turn back would admit illusion. To surrender would mean hunger had lied. As they marched, they left footprints that did not fade easily. The earth remembered their weight. The rivers remembered the churn of their crossing. Forests whispered as branches parted and closed again behind them. Birds flew from branches startled by metal glinting beneath canopy. The land watched, patient and ancient, untroubled yet unyielding. These journeys did not return as expected. Some ended in silence, their paths lost to vines and water. Others limped home with stories of hardship but no gold. A few returned not in triumph, but in whispers hollow-eyed, speaking of endless green and endless disappointment. Yet in their absence, legend only grew. For men who had not dared the journey believed those who failed simply had not gone far enough. Thus the myth strengthened. The Golden Kingdom retreated deeper into imagination. And the next wave of seekers sharpened their resolve even further, convinced that they alone were destined to find what others could not grasp. Meanwhile, in the high valleys, the Muisca continued their life untouched in rhythm if not in spirit. The mountains rose each morning. The lakes greeted the sun. People tilled soil, shaped pottery, offered gold in quiet devotion. They knew nothing of distant camps where foreign leaders traced future routes with trembling fingers over maps stained by sweat and ambition. They did not know that the world beyond their mountains now held its breath for a dream that had never belonged to conquest. Yet change moved closer with every footstep carved into jungle, with every river crossed, with every decision made in distant halls. The legend was no longer a gentle story of light. It had become a force, a shadow wandering towards sacred land. And as dawn touched the Andes each morning, casting gold across peaks without care for kings or soldiers, the world remained poised on the edge of two truths, the quiet truth of ceremony and the heavy truth of desire. Between them lay distance. Soon they would collide. When ambition takes root in the heart, it grows not like a tree, steady and grounded, but like a flame, feeding on hope, brightening with longing, consuming all around it with slow and silent hunger. So it was with the seekers who came for El Dorado. The land did not change for them. They changed for the land, but not in the way devotion transforms. They changed in the way thirst changes a traveler lost beneath a merciless sun. The forests deepened as they pressed onward. Vines thickened, forming walls of green that resisted passage. Leaves dripped with constant mist, and the earth felt spongy beneath boots that had never known such ground. The air itself clung heavy to skin, perfumed by wild flowers and decay, a scent rich and ancient, unbothered by the march of men. Their armor dulled beneath constant damp, iron giving way to rust, gold buttons fading to dull bronze. Sweat ran down faces like rain, and rain fell as though the sky never tired of releasing its sorrow. Along riverbanks, they paused to rest. These waters were broad and slow in some places, churning and fierce in others, carrying silt that shimmered faintly beneath sunlight as though mocking the gold they sought. Canoes carved from tree trunks glided by, paddled by hands that understood the rhythm of river and season. The strangers watched with longing not only for the imagined treasure, but for the ease with which the river's children moved. Yet they did not learn, they only envied. They followed rivers east, believing each bend would reveal a gleaming city, each horizon would burst with brilliance. Trees arched overhead like cathedral ceilings formed not by human hands, but by time itself. Birds called from branches with voices bright as metal bells. Monkeys leapt lightly across vines. Fish flickered beneath surface like brief flashes of memory. The jungle pulsed with life, radiant and unyielding, yet the men saw only barrier. Those who led them marked each hardship not as sign to turn, but as omen of closeness. The harsher the journey, the greater the treasure, they told themselves in silence, clinging to stubborn belief. When storms broke, rain fell so thick it blurred the world into a wash of green and gray. Thunder curled through mountains, echoing like drums of creation. Lightning split sky and tree alike, yet they did not stop. They marched and rode and stumbled, driven not by faith but by fever. Some traced routes carved by rivers into untouched wilderness. Others turned toward unknown highlands where thin air gripped lungs like invisible hands. Each step took them farther from truth, deeper into dream. Hunger carved hollows beneath cheekbones, eyes sank into shadow, and still they whispered silently that they would find it. The city of gold, the land of radiance, the promise that kept their hearts beating through mud and misery. Those who fell along the way were buried where earth would take them, their final rest surrounded by trees older than memory. Their names faded into moss and water, their armor rusting, their ambitions dissolving into root and soil. Yet their passing did not soften those who remained. Loss hardened resolve, suffering sharpened desire. They grew certain that the land resisted them only because it held something precious, something worth enduring every hardship. They did not see that the land resisted because it simply lived, and life defends itself, quietly but firmly. When they reached the great rivers of the lowlands, the world opened wide. Water stretched to horizon, reflecting sky like broken mirrors trembling with movement. They built rafts, lashed timbers, pushed off with poles, trusting currents to carry them toward destiny. The river's surface glittered not with gold, but with sunlight fractured by motion. It was beauty beyond measure, yet they did not cherish it. They saw only possibility disguised as promise. Days passed on open water. Nights fell heavy and moonlit, insects buzzing in thick swarms, animals calling from dark banks. The river carried fish silver as moonlight, caimans drifting low beneath reeds, birds roosting like jewels in canopy. But in the hearts of the travelers, unrest grew. Where was the sparkling city? Where were the temples gilded by sunlight? Where were the riches whispered across oceans? They reached river mouths where land softened into wide marsh and reed, where sky expanded into boundless dome. Yet no golden halls rose from jungle. No shining towers pierced clouds. Only silence and wind and water stretching farther than ambition could measure. Some realized, too late, that they had not followed truth, but illusion shaped by longing, yet even that realization did not free them. To turn back was to admit folly. Pride shackled them more tightly than any chain. So they pressed on again, following tributaries, climbing hills, tracing villages whose people lived in harmony with earth rather than in pursuit of gleam. The Muisca homeland remained high above, untouched for a time. But along edges of lands beyond, others suffered from these seeking feet. Villages that once knew only the rhythm of crop and ceremony now faced strangers who looked upon emerald beads and delicate gold ornaments with ravenous eyes. Ritual objects became trophies. Temples became targets. Hands that once planted seeds now trembled in fear. Yet even then, some among the seekers paused at the sight of these lands. Valleys carved like gentle bowls, houses woven low and warm, children running with laughter as light as birdsong, priests chanting to rising sun. For a moment, even ambition felt hushed by the serenity of a world built not on conquest, but continuity. But moments pass quickly when hunger commands hearts. They asked, sometimes with force, sometimes with pleading, for the location of the Golden King. They did not hear the answer, though it was given again. Gold lies in ceremony, not in hoard. The ruler shines only for dawn, not forever. Gold returns to water by devotion, not by greed. Such truth was not enough. They turned again, moving deeper into mountain paths, believing always that destiny waited just beyond sight. Their maps darkened with sweat and rain. Their bodies thinned. Their spirits flickered like candles in wind. And still they marched. The land witnessed their passing without judgment. Mountains did not tremble. Lakes did not ripple in fear. Forests did not bow. The world simply endured as it always had. Human desire dances brightly but briefly. The earth remains, patient and eternal. Some seekers disappeared entirely, claimed by river or forest or fever. Their names dissolved into rumor, their dreams into quiet soil. Others returned broken, whispering not of gold but of green, endless green, of rivers wide as hope, of mountains that swallowed ambition whole. Yet for everyone who returned defeated, another prepared to leave, convinced they would succeed where others failed. Thus the cycle of longing fed itself, and El Dorado's myth grew stronger not with proof, but with absence. Meanwhile, the sacred valley still breathed. Lake Guatavita lay quiet beneath morning mist. Villagers walked terraces with baskets of harvest. Children learned to grind maize beneath watchful eyes. And each generation, a leader stepped into golden dawn, shimmering not to claim wealth, but to return it. Gold entered water. Sunlight kissed surface. Silence held the moment like a sacred vessel. And across an ocean, men sharpened their ambition sharper still. For the world rarely understands ritual when consumed by desire. And sometimes, the most dangerous treasure is not what lies hidden beneath earth or water, but what lies ungrasped within the human heart. The lake had always known silence. It rested within a cradle of green hills, its waters held like breath beneath a bowl of sky. Mist gathered softly each dawn, draping its surface in silver lace, lifting only when the sun rose high enough to call the day awake. To those who lived near it, the lake was not merely water. It was spirit, memory, and threshold. A place where prayer dissolved into depth and light returned to the world renewed. For generations uncounted, nothing disturbed this stillness except the gentle weight of offerings and the quiet feet of pilgrims who came not to take, but to give. Gold settled like fine grains of time along the lake's hidden floor, resting beside emerald beads, ceramic vessels, and carved figures shaped with devotion rather than hunger. All sank without splash, as though welcomed by unseen hands. But sacred things, once whispered into rumor, began to echo far beyond the mountains. And one morning, centuries after the first golden leader walked into these waters, strangers stood at its edge not in reverence but in calculation. They gazed upon the lake the way a merchant gazes at locked chest, not seeing the stillness, not hearing the breath of earth, only imagining what might lie beneath. The first hands to disturb its peace came not with rage, but with eager precision. Men traced its banks, measuring the curve of shoreline with rope and pole, sketching angles onto parchment. They saw only geometry where the Muisca saw spirit. They murmured quiet numbers where ancestors once whispered prayers. They believed they could drain the world's memory as easily as opening a purse. Laborers set to work cutting into the hillside. They dug with iron tools foreign to this soil, slicing terraces into sacred earth. Each strike loosened not only soil, but silence itself. Earth groaned under weight of intention. Workers hauled dirt away basket by basket, forming channels meant to steal the lake's breath, to draw its water downward like blood from a wound. They believed they performed engineering. In truth, they enacted interruption. Water began to retreat. Slowly at first, gathering into currents that slid down carved paths, then more boldly as channels deepened. The lake, which had accepted offerings so gently, now surrendered unwilling water in rivulets and torrents. Mud banks emerged where once only shimmering surface lay. Reeds bowed under lowering tides. Birds circled overhead, unsettled by the shift. The air felt different, as though the world held its breath in unease. What emerged from the shallows startled even those who sought treasure. Not piles of gold, not mountains of radiance, but shards of memory. Beads glimmering green as jungle leaves, small figures shaped like spirits and ancestors, pieces of hammered gold so thin they fluttered in trembling hands like captured sunlight. They did not speak of wealth, they spoke of worship. Yet even sacred fragments feed hunger when seen through the wrong eyes, and so the digging continued, channels carved deeper. Water rushed faster. Hillside soil, once stable as centuries, began to weaken. Walls of earth slumped, collapsing inward with low groans like weary giants settling into sleep. Mud poured down terraces, blocking channels, swirling back toward lake as though the land tried to defend what remained. Workers struggled, tools slipping in mire. Sweat mixed with soil until forearms bore the color of earth itself. Still, they persisted. They widened the cut. They deepened the trench. They drove stakes into soft ground to brace walls that did not wish to hold. They lifted baskets heavy with wet clay and stones slick with ancestral water. They bent nature to ambition, believing time itself would bow under their will. And yet the world resists intrusion with quiet strength. Rains fell as though summoned by spirit. Earth shifted. Walls crumbled again. The lake, wounded, did not break. It bled but endured. The men cursed their obstacles, never realizing they were not fighting mud, but memory, not battling water, but reverence older than iron. Artifacts surfaced as though rising from dreams. Delicate discs engraved with sun rays, tiny figures with arms open to sky, golden frogs shaped like guardians of lakeshore marsh. Each object bore not wealth, but story. They were fragments of prayers, echoes of devotion that had lain cradled in sacred darkness for generations. Held in trembling hands, they seemed to pulse faintly with ancient breath, as though still alive. Those who found them felt a strange hush, a sense of trespass, even if they could not name it. Yet hunger overrides humility when gold gleams under uncertain light. They pocketed tokens, stashed them in cloth, carried them away not as relics, but as trophies. But gold in such places does not like to be taken. It resists belonging to grasping hands. Many who touched those sacred offerings found misfortune shadowing their steps. Illness, loss, restlessness, not curses spoken, but consequence born from imbalance. For the lake had not meant its gifts to surface in greed. Days stretched into weeks, the trench widening until it scarred the hillside. Where once reeds whispered in wind and waters mirrored sky, now mud lay exposed, raw and aching. Lake Guatavita shrank, revealing its hidden body, pale and wounded beneath sun. And yet, as water retreated, treasure did not reveal itself in the abundance expected. There was no city of gold sleeping beneath waves, no glittering throne room of a lost king. Only the quiet remains of offerings, far fewer than rumor promised, because rumor had never come from truth, but from misunderstanding. Men looked at their meager findings and felt confusion before frustration. Had they not drained a sacred world for this? Had the lake not been whispered as vault of endless wealth? They had mistaken prayer for fortune, offering for accumulation. They saw only what their hunger allowed them to see, and hunger sees poorly. They did not notice the silence thickening around them, nor the wind cooling as if in mourning. Eventually, the earth refused further disturbance. The trench faltered. Water fought to return. Mud sealed the channel like scar tissue forming over wound, and the men, weary and disillusioned, withdrew. They left with what fragments they could carry, pieces of a sacred story never meant to lie in hands of strangers. Their tools rusted, their channels dried. Grass crept slowly back across wounds. The lake, though smaller, remained. Time, patient as mountain stone, began its healing. Waters rose again, not in rush, but in slow return, inch by inch, season by season. Reeds grew where earth had been torn. Birds nested once more along softened banks. Wind danced across surface with renewed grace. The lake exhaled, as though enduring pain had made its stillness deeper. It did not rise to its full glory. Scars remained, visible in curve and contour. But scars, too, are stories, reminders of what was endured, proof that sacred things may bend yet not break. The offerings that had been taken did not diminish its spirit. For the true wealth of Guatavita had never been gold. It had been meaning, and meaning cannot be drained by hands that do not understand it. Far across seas, small figures and golden discs lay in chests or cabinets, admired for beauty, but stripped of purpose. Their shine could not reveal their soul. For the soul remained here, under sky and mountain, in water that knows prayer, in silence that remembers every hand that ever released light into its depths. Lake Guatavita continued to watch dawn. It continued to breathe. It continued to hold the memory of kings gilded not by greed, but by reverence. And beneath its waters, in quiet darkness where sunlight sleeps, ancient gold still rests, not forgotten, but at peace. For what was offered to heaven cannot be stolen by those who do not know how to listen. Time moved in long breaths across the highlands. The first attempt to open the lake faded into memory like footprints washed by rain. Earth healed where it could, grass rooted where stone had been cut, and reeds whispered again along the shallows. The Muisca lived quieter than before, watching the water every dawn as if praying that silence would become shield and time would become guardian. And yet, legends travel farther than sorrow, and belief in gold outlasts both failure and truth. Rumor carried wind with it, crossing valleys, then seas again, finding ears eager to hear that somewhere beyond the Andes a treasure waited, untouched, watching centuries pass like dreams. Greed, once awakened, rarely returns to rest. It becomes lineage, a hunger passed like inheritance. So, years later, Strangers returned to the water's edge, not priests, not pilgrims, but men with maps inked by speculation and hearts lit by desire. They came dressed not in armor but in confidence of a new age, believing knowledge and engineering could succeed where earlier ambition had faltered. They looked at the lake and did not see spirit. They saw a challenge left incomplete, a vault yet unopened. Tools changed with time. Where iron picks once rang against stone, now machines rattled, ropes tightened, and pulleys strained beneath weight. Workers drove stakes into softened hillsides, built platforms above trembling earth, and stretched cables across water like threads tugging at a wound not yet closed. Timber frames creaked, barrels bobbed, and pumps clattered in stubborn rhythm. The world around them remained calm, yet beneath that calm lay unease, as if the lake watched without blinking. Again, channels were carved. Earth that once held offerings shale by shale was forced apart, its veins exposed to air, its patience tested. Water obeyed gravity and retreated once more, pulled unwilling down sloped trenches. The lake drew thin. Mud glistened under morning light, wrinkling like ancient skin drying under sun. Fish flailed, reeds bowed, and silence thickened like mist too heavy to rise. The men searched the exposed bed with trembling anticipation. They sifted mud with hands and tools, brushing soil from shapes that emerged slowly. Fragments of gold worn by time and water, small anthropomorphic pendants, sun discs dulled by centuries of sacred sleep. Emerald beads still shone green as vine leaves beneath forest canopy. Ceramic vessels cracked by Earth's pressure surfaced like memories half buried in dream. They collected these pieces, weighed them, marveled not at the devotion they represented, but only at the metal they contained. They whispered numbers to themselves, measured success in ounces rather than meaning. Yet even then, the lake yielded little compared to the price of its disturbance. For a sacred place gives only reluctantly to those who do not ask with reverence. As channels deepened, earth grew unstable once more. Mud walls sagged, support beams groaned, pumps choked when silt clogged their mouths. Tools sank into mire like stones into sleep. A hush settled as if the land itself had drawn breath. And then, as before, the earth shifted. A section of trench wall slumped forward, collapsing with sound like distant thunder. Water rushed back into space carved by hands that never sought understanding. A slow surge at first, then faster, until the lake reclaimed the ground taken from it. Timbers cracked beneath the weight. Workers stumbled, sinking knee-deep into mud that clung as though unwilling to release them. Barrels overturned, ropes snapped, machines sputtered as water swallowed them. In moments, the lake undid weeks of human effort, not in anger, but in inevitability. The way mountains outlast storms, the way rivers carve stone no matter how long it takes. The men stepped back, breath heavy, clothes soaked, faces pale not from fear of nature, but from realization. Again, the lake would take what belonged to it. They had not found treasure beyond scattered pieces. They had not uncovered mythical wealth or the gleaming bed of gold they imagined. The lake had given only what it chose, and then closed itself like eyelid over sacred dream. Still, the world did not learn. Word of each fragment spread, fueling curiosity and envy thousands of miles away. Investors saw promise where there was only patience. Scholars argued over depths and calculations, convinced that if only the proper angle or pump or trench were used, the lake would finally surrender its secret. They treated a sacred world-like puzzle, believing devotion could be measured in engineering and faith surpassed by force. More attempts followed across decades and centuries, each shaped by new tools, each built on old longing. Some lowered water level with buckets and manpower. Others carved channels broader and deeper. Still others attempted to drain entire basins with systems that groaned under weight of ambition. In every age, men approached with certainty, and in every age, the lake endured with silence. Pieces surfaced each time, small human forms, sun discs, animal effigies, thin plates hammered from sacred gold, all shaped by hands who believed beauty belonged not in vault but in offering. Those who took them often felt only triumph. Those who witnessed them felt ache, as though seeing grave goods removed from the resting place of gods. Eventually, knowledge began to shift. Scholars studied Muisca culture. Anthropologists listened to descendants. Museums displayed artifacts with plaques that spoke of ritual rather than riches. The world started to remember what had been forgotten in centuries of hunger, that this lake held not treasure but memory, not wealth but devotion carved in metal and faith, and yet damage remained. The bowl of the lake was not as deep as before. Its edges bore scars of engineered trenches. Its silence was thinner, touched by history of intrusion. But water still gathered at dawn, frost still glimmered on reeds, birds still dipped wings to drink, clouds still mirrored in mirrored surface. And somewhere beneath, in soft silt layered like ancient sleep, offerings still lay untouched, gold quiet as prayer, resting where hands once placed it with reverence so deep it could not be broken by greed. The world slowly learned to look differently. Some came now not with shovels, but with notebooks and silence. They walked softly at sunrise, respecting wind, acknowledging mountains, recognizing that this was not a vault, but a temple. They saw that the lake's true offering was not metal, but meaning, a reminder that wealth is not possession, but presence. Gold remains below, yes, sleeping like sunlight beneath Earth's eyelids. But it rests not because men failed to take it. It rests because it was never meant to be taken. Some places are not ours to open. Some treasures are not ours to hold. Some light belongs only to water and sky. And so the lake waits still, not guarding treasure, but memory. A mirror to the heavens, a cradle for prayer, a wound that healed as best it could. It is quiet again, as it was at the beginning, not untouched, but undefeated. To understand gold in the world of the Muisca, one must forget what gold became in the eyes of others. Forget the weight of coins and crowns, the shine of conquest, the fever that burns in those who chase wealth across oceans. Forget the thought that value lies in ownership or accumulation. In this land high among the Andes, gold was not wealth, it was wonder. For here, in valleys brushed by cloud and kissed by early light, gold belonged first to the sun. It glimmered not as metal, but as morning, descending each dawn in rays that painted the mountains in molten warmth. The Muisca looked to the sky and saw not endless emptiness, but presence, a luminous spirit rising with patience, falling with grace, returning always, eternal and generous. To them, gold was sunlight made touchable, a gift from sky to earth and earth to sky again. They called it Tio, a sacred word, a holy breath. Gold was not minted into coins nor hoarded in chests. It did not change hands in markets nor buy favor or bread. It lived in shrines, in offerings, in ceremony. It adorned gods rather than men, statues rather than soldiers, altars rather than halls of power. Its value lay in its return to the world, not in its possession. When gold was worked, it was not hammered into lavish armor or heavy ingots. It was shaped into delicate figures, birds with wings spread in quiet flight, frogs poised as guardians of water, serpents curved like rivers, suns radiating devotion. Craftsmen shaped each piece with hands steady as prayer, melting sunlight, breathing meaning into form. These artisans did not seek glory, they sought harmony. They believed gold was divine substance, and their craft a sacred act. In small workshops open to breeze and dawn, fire glowed in clay furnaces fed by resin and wood. Metal softened like wax, flowing into molds of stone or clay. Hands smoothed edges, polished surfaces, carved symbols, traced lines of ancestry and myth. Children watched with wide eyes, not seeing wealth forged, but light reborn. Smoke curled upward, carrying whisper of offering to sky. When pieces were complete, they did not rest long in human hands. They were lifted toward the heavens in reverence, then carried to sacred sites, lakes still as sacred breath, temples where incense curled like mist, mountaintops where wind sang in thin air. Gold shone briefly beneath sky, as if warming once more beneath its parent light, then disappeared into darkness, lowered into water, buried in shrines, hidden in earth. It was given back because that was its purpose, not to stay but to return. In ceremonies, gold dust brushed skin like soft sunrise. Young leaders stepped forward into ritual, their bodies shimmering not to claim power but to release it. Gold touched them lightly, settled on shoulders, clung to heartbeat and breath, then washed away into sacred lake as though dissolving back into sky. To become gilded was not to elevate self, but to surrender self, to let body become vessel of light, then return light to its source. Villagers gathered not to behold majesty, but to witness humility. The water accepted offerings without ripple, the sky answered with quiet warmth, and the moment hung suspended between human and divine. When gold sank below surface, it did not fall like wealth lost, it drifted like prayer fulfilled. It became part of depth, part of eternity, part of silence, and those who watched felt peace, not envy. Gold adorned gods in carved temples, small figures placed near shrines, not to demand worship, but to hold presence. It gleamed beside emeralds like fragments of dawn resting on mountain stone. Yet these treasures were not hidden away for pride. They were shown only to remind hearts that beauty belonged not to one person but to all, and that sacred things existed not to hoard but to honor. Among the Muisca, power did not lie in wealth. It lay in balance, in the way water nourished fields, in the way wind moved through tall grasses, in the way rituals echoed across generations. Gold was not tool of rule, it was mirror of sun and memory of creation. A leader's worth came not from how much he possessed, but how much he returned, how gently he guided, how humbly he walked to the water wrapped in dust of dawn. Markets in the Muisca world were places of barter and quiet exchange: maize, salt, textiles, pottery, obsidian blades, fruit, coca leaves, shells gathered from distant coasts. Goods passed not through greed but through need, through trade shaped by trust. Gold did not enter these markets. To use it for trade would break its sacred nature, turning prayer into transaction, light into weight. Instead, it lived in myth and ritual, in the hands of priests who read the patterns of stars and consulted lakes for guidance. It gleamed at festivals celebrating harvest and fertility, adorned dancers who moved like wind through reeds, shimmering as though stars themselves had descended to join the music. And when ceremonies ended, gold returned once more to darkness, completing cycle like the sun setting behind peaks each evening. Even emeralds, green as mountain moss and river reeds, held meaning not in commerce but in symbolism. Their color reflected fertility, life, renewal. Together, gold and emerald embodied world above and world below, sun and earth, light and growth, sky and soil. They were paired not to display wealth, but to express cosmic harmony. To take gold from this world was to unweave balance. To hoard it was to break the cycle, to trap sunlight in earthly hands that were never meant to close around it. To drain a lake was not to uncover fortune, but to silence prayer. Yet the Muisca did not fear loss. They trusted that what they gave returned in spirit. They believed abundance was not measured by possession, but by generosity. They walked fields knowing sun would rise again, and lakes would shimmer again, and gold would always find its way back to sky through ritual hands. In this world, value was not counted, it was felt. Gold was breath of dawn, offering was wealth, memory was treasury, devotion was abundance. And for as long as sunlight touched mountain peaks each morning, the cycle continued, unbroken, sacred, shimmering in silence. In the high plateaus where wind moves like ancient breath and clouds drift, low enough to trace the ridge lines with silver fingers, the Muisca world glowed not with the glitter of conquest, but with the steady radiance of devotion. Gold rested here like sunlight made patient, its purpose never loud, never boastful. It did not blaze to blind, it warmed to remind. In quiet workshops nestled beside terraced fields and running streams, artisans shaped the sacred metal with hands that understood both fragility and eternity. Their tools were simple: clay molds baked by fire, stone anvils worn smooth by time, charcoal that crackled as though whispering incantations into molten pools. There was no factory roar, no clamor of greed, only the steady hum of careful breath and the soft ring of bronze striking bronze. Gold did not obey force. It yielded only to those who approached it gently, melting in clay crucibles like morning mist dissolving in sunlight. When poured, it flowed not like liquid wealth, but like light returning to its own reflection. Craftsmen guided it into forms not chosen by impulse, but shaped by myth and memory. Birds with wings poised for flight symbolized spirit crossing realms. Frogs, sacred guardians of water and renewal, embodied life reborn in rain. Serpents curled like rivers, remembering the flow of creation. Sun disks spread rays in perfect balance, echoing the celestial order above. Every figure carried purpose. Every curve honored story. For gold was not made to decorate bodies. It was made to speak to gods. Younger apprentices learned not through instruction alone, but through stillness. They watched flame flicker beneath crucible, eyes reflecting its glow like stars on lake water. They touched cooled pieces reverently, feeling the quiet pulse of devotion within them. They learned that metal was not to be commanded, but invited to change, shaped in harmony with breath and rhythm. Their teachers spoke little, allowing the fire to teach patience and the metal to teach humility. Nearby, emerald gatherers returned from mountain slopes and river beds where green gems slept inside stone like seeds hidden beneath soil. They washed each stone in streams fed by glacier melt, watching water reveal clarity or cloud. Emeralds, like gold, were not currency but spirit. Their green reflected earth and growth, the promise of life renewed. When placed beside gold, they formed balance: sun and earth, sky and field, warmth and root. These stones adorned offerings, not crowns. They lay beside clay figurines and golden birds, deep in shrines where incense curled and prayer shimmered like breath in cold air. In temples built of earth and memory, priests held ceremonies where the air vibrated with song. Bells rang softly, not to command attention, but to awaken the unseen. Smoke from burning resin rose in spirals, carrying whispered intentions toward heavens. Gold figures glimmered beside emerald beads on stone altars, not as possessions, but as companions to prayer. Rituals did not seek favors. They honored balance, ensured passage of seasons, expressed gratitude for maize and rain and wind. The universe here was not conquered, it was conversed with. Children learned early that wealth was not measured by what hands held, but by what hearts returned. They watched their elders offer handfuls of gold dust to water, saw the shimmer disperse like dawn across still surface. To them, the ritual did not symbolize loss, it symbolized belonging. To offer was to be in harmony. To give was to remain whole. Seasons passed in gentle cycle. Maize ripened in golden rows, potatoes swelled beneath soil, coca leaves dried beneath warm breeze. Gold appeared only in moments of ceremony, and then disappeared again into sacred depths or quiet shrines. The land breathed in rhythm with its people, and the people breathed in rhythm with sky. Yet beyond mountains, beyond oceans, beyond the reach of this balance, another understanding of gold grew louder. In places where sun touched stone walls carved with ambition, gold lost its voice of prayer and took on voice of power. It clinked in hands, weighed on scales, turned kings into conquerors and men into seekers of gleam over spirit. And when word came of gold across the sea, that hunger sharpened like blade, carving pathways not of reverence but of conquest. Still, here in the highlands, long before foreign boots pressed into sacred soil, gold lived as offering. It gleamed only briefly in human sight before returning to water or temple. And the lakes, deep and still, became quiet vaults not of treasure, but of memory, each piece settling into silt like a star settling into night. Those who gave gold to the depths did not expect reward, they expected balance. They believed the world watched and answered, not with riches, but with wind that carried rain, with fields that bore fruit, with sky that did not turn away. Life was sustained by respect rather than extraction. And devotion did not end when offerings sank. It continued in each breath of song, each seed planted, each fire kindled at dawn to honor sun's return. When foreigners eventually arrived and asked where the gold lay, the Muisca answered truthfully. It lay in lakes, in temples, in earth. They meant it spiritually. The strangers heard it literally. And misunderstanding began its long journey. Gold that once symbolized connection now became symbol of desire. Gold that once returned to sky through offering now drew strangers to valleys they did not understand. But even as this misunderstanding grew, the sacred meaning of gold did not vanish. It remained in hearts and ritual, even as storms approached. For meaning does not disappear when misunderstood. It waits, patient and eternal, like light beneath shadow. High on the plateaus, the sacred cycle flowed on. Reeds swayed, birds circled, water mirrored dawn. The sky still bathed mountains in first light, gilding them in warmth that no conquest could claim. And beneath lake's surface, untouched layers of golden offerings rested like dreams. Silent, luminous, eternal. Gold lived here not to be found, but to be honored. Not to be held, but to be released. Not to enrich man, but to remind him he belongs to sky and earth alike. And in that truth the world glowed, not with glitter, but with grace. Long before the first ship touched foreign shore, the Muisca land breathed in calm rhythm, unhurried, unbroken. Valleys held laughter, lakes held memory, mountains held silence ancient as starlight. The world here did not rise or fall with ambition. It moved in cycles of rain and sun, sowing and harvest, offering and return. And for generations, nothing disturbed the balance between people and sky. But balance is delicate, and the wind of another world began to stir across the ocean, carrying with it a hunger shaped by conquest and crowned by gold. It arrived not as storm at first, but as whisper, tales of gilded kings, of lakes glittering with treasure, of lands ruled by sunlight made metal. Men who had already taken kingdoms and cities listened with sharpened hearts. They believed not in ceremony, but in wealth, and what they believed they sought to claim. When they arrived, they did not come quietly. Boots pressed into soil that had never known such weight. Armor flashed in light that once touched only cornfields and clay. Horses snorted at altitude, breath steaming like restless spirits. The mountains watched in their eternal stillness as strangers traced their edges, drawn not by reverence but by desire deeper than understanding. At first, the Muisca saw visitors not as enemies, but as people from another land, curious, unfamiliar, but not yet feared. They offered food, a seat near hearth, calm glances instead of suspicion. Hospitality was part of order, a gesture life required. But hospitality soon met hunger that did not know how to be sated. Strangers did not look upon fields with appreciation, they saw land to be claimed. They did not gaze at lakes with respect, they saw vaults disguised as water. They did not hear songs of ceremony, they heard rumor of gold. They questioned elders, priests, farmers. When told gold was given to the gods, they did not understand devotion, they sensed concealment. When told offerings rested beneath sacred waters, they did not hear meaning, they heard opportunity. Every truth bent beneath misunderstanding. Soon, the world shifted. Weapons emerged not because they were needed, but because power wishes to be seen. Steel glimmered beneath mountain sun, sharp as hunger. The quiet sound of grinding maize and water against stone now mixed with the clink of metal, the shuffle of armored footsteps, the murmur of orders spoken with certainty rather than humility. Horses pawed earth where children once played. Smoke rose not only from hearths, but from fires lit by those who did not know the land's spirit. The Muisca, who once walked with calm breath, now watched with wary hearts. Elders spoke in low tones about change carried on wind. Lakes reflected not only sky, but shadow. Rituals continued, yet they felt heavier, as though each offering were also a prayer for safety. Fields still ripened, but hands moved faster, glancing often toward distant dust where unfamiliar feet wandered. Some villagers fled to hills, carrying children and clay pots filled with maize, seeking refuge among frailejones and mist. Others remained, hoping calm would return if they stood steady like mountains. Yet even stone cannot stop a tide shaped by greed. Those who stayed learned new fear, not of gods or famine, but of men whose hunger outweighed reverence. The newcomers demanded gold not as symbol, but as possession. They searched temples and homes, not for meaning, but for glitter. They took emeralds like raindrops stolen from cloud. They lifted sacred objects meant for gods and weighed them in hands that did not feel their pulse. Objects once placed gently in water now struck cold metal in foreign pockets. Fear settled like thick fog over plateaus once bright with morning calm. Fields swayed under wind, but laughter faded. Children no longer chased dragonflies as freely, their eyes watched horizon instead. Women gathered water quickly, glancing over shoulders. Priests told songs in hushed tones, unsure if voices would be safe in open air. The people had offered gold freely to sky for generations, believing generosity kept the world balanced. But generosity could not shield them from those who misunderstood its meaning. When gold ceased to appear in strangers' hands, they assumed deception. They demanded more, certain wealth lay hidden just beyond sight. They dug not only in earth but in lives, rooting through villages, questioning, taking, believing always that the next horizon or mountain or lake would reveal abundance. Yet the Muisca world did not break. Even as fear grew, dignity held. Elders kept speaking to children about sun and offering, about lakes that remember prayers. Families bowed heads not in defeat, but in quiet resilience. Lakes still mirrored dawn, mountains still breathed cloud. Ritual fires still glowed at dusk, even if flames burned lower, even if songs trembled like birds startled into flight. Sometimes, resistance came not in battle, but in silence. Families disappeared into forests at night, carrying only memory and seeds, leaving hearths cold but spirit intact. Priests hid sacred objects in earth, choosing burial over surrender. Women whispered to rivers under moonlight, asking water to protect their ancestors' gifts. In these acts, the land became ally, turning human footsteps into quiet echoes, hiding hearts in mist, blending prayers with rain. Loss gathered slowly, like frost creeping across field. Some leaders were taken, their voices never returning to morning council. Some villages emptied, stone foundations left behind like bones of memory. Some children grew without learning songs their ancestors once sang freely. But even in loss, there was not surrender, only endurance. For people shaped by mountain breath do not vanish. They root like trees in wind, bending but not breaking. What the strangers never understood was this: gold given freely to gods cannot be taken without consequence. Its power is not in metal, but in meaning. To steal it is to fracture balance, to unweave harmony older than kingdoms and maps. And though violence left scars on earth and heart alike, the sacred never fully fled. It waited beneath still waters, beneath mountain shadow, beneath memory. The land, like its people, endured, and endurance is its own quiet form of victory. The wind that once carried only the scent of wildflowers and fresh earth now held a new undertone: smoke, iron, and unease. It moved across terraces where maize once bent peacefully in the sun, and brushed rooftops of clay homes where weaving and laughter once shaped afternoons. It was the same wind as before, yet changed, as though carrying echoes of voices not born from this land. The Muisca world did not collapse all at once. It dimmed slowly, like embers cooling after ceremony, still warm, still alive, but touched by chill creeping inward. Custom by custom, certainty by certainty, days shifted. Rituals continued, yet carried a heaviness like prayer spoken under watchful eyes. The offering bowls still held emerald and gold dust, but the air around them trembled with fear that sacred acts might be misunderstood or punished. In markets once filled with soft chatter and trade of maize, salt, cotton, and coca leaves, silence grew between stalls. Feet moved quickly, not lingering. Hands traded goods with subtle caution. Children stayed close to elders, eyes wide, unsure when stillness might break. Those who came seeking gold did not depart when the first hopes faded. Ambition rarely dies when fed by story. Some among them believed wealth lay deeper, hidden by earth or guarded by gods. Others, disappointed in treasure but hungry for power, turned attention to land, to people, to control itself. What they could not take as gold, they sought to take in labor, in breath, in spirit. Fields that once belonged to families became marked by stakes and claims written in unfamiliar symbols. Men who once planted maize by moon cycles now dug earth under command. Their labor given not to crops, but to those who arrived without invitation. In some valleys, offerings ceased, not by choice but by fear. Rituals paused like a held breath, uncertain if night sky still listened, or if watchers from another world would punish devotion mistaken for secrecy. And yet, even as power shifted, the mountains remained. They stood indifferent and eternal, their peaks carved by wind older than conquest. They had seen empires rise and fall long before strangers crossed oceans, and they would see many more. Their slopes held hidden paths where families slipped away by night, moving through reeds and moss, guided by stars that outlasted kings. Refuge was found in high places where clouds lay thick and cold, where footsteps faded into mist and only wind whispered. There, in the quiet breath of the Paramo, traditions survived in hushed tones. Mothers taught children the old prayers, not loudly as before, but softly, like lullabies carried beneath blankets of fog. Fathers shaped small gold amulets and buried them under rock, knowing the gods would hear offerings, even if no lake embraced them. Wisdom lived not in grand ceremonies, but in memory kept alive when light grows thin. Some did not flee. Some endured in place, tending fields as they always had, trusting soil more than fear. They lowered heads not in submission but in preservation, waiting for time to loosen the grip of strangers as all storms eventually loosen. In these homes, rituals continued in shadow, honey placed by doorframe for ancestors, incense burned at dawn behind closed shutters, tiny emerald beads hidden inside woven belts. Traditions tucked themselves into the everyday, invisible yet unbroken. There were harsh years. Illness traveled with the newcomers, silent and merciless as night frost, touching bodies unprepared for its breath. Villages that once pulsed with life fell quiet, their doorways empty, their hearths cold beneath ash. Even mountains wept in rain those seasons, as though sky mourned alongside earth. But even grief carries seed of memory, and memory is ground where life grows again. Those who survived lit new fires. They planted again. They whispered names of the lost into wind, trusting it to carry them to the beyond. In the soft hours before sunrise, some walked to lakes still sacred, even in fear, laying flowers instead of gold, believing spirit recognized devotion in any form. Mist curled around them like ancestral arms. Water held the sky as faithfully as ever. Mountains listened. For the world does not erase culture with force, it only buries it, and buried things remember how to rise. Years turned to decades, and the strangers who once sought gold left behind more sorrow than gleam. They found fragments, yes, but never the wealth they imagined. What they took was not treasure, but peace. Yet even that theft could not claim the heart of the land entirely. Life returned where it was pushed away. Rivers flowed as though cleansing memory. Fields sprouted anew, slow yet steady, as though the earth itself healed alongside its people. The legend, once a sacred whisper of light and ceremony, became twisted into tale of endless treasure in distant lands. It traveled into books and maps, drawn by hands that had never seen the high valleys at dawn or touched the still surface of Lake Guatavita. In distant places, El Dorado became fantasy of gold without end, a dream of wealth waiting simply to be taken. And the world forgot that it had begun as prayer. Yet here, in the Andes, memory held true. Grandparents told children not of golden cities, but of shimmering dust washed from sacred skin, of lakes that guarded breath of gods, of leaders who gave rather than hoarded, of offerings carried on water like sunrise reaching horizon. They told them gold belonged first to sun, that greed blinds the heart, that balance is wealth deeper than metal. As generations passed, the land softened again. Fields stretched wide once more, and people walked without constantly glancing behind. Lakes reclaimed quiet, reeds lifting tall again, fish darting beneath mirrored surface. Birds returned to perch in branches above water, their wings scattering droplets like tiny stars. And when the sun rose, mountains glowed as they always had, indifferent to sorrow, yet touched by memory of devotion. The Muisca identity, reshaped by sorrow yet anchored by spirit, endured, not as relic but as living breath. Rituals adapted but remained. Language shifted but held echoes of prayer. Gold still found its way into ceremony, not in heaps, but in small tokens carried by those who remembered. And always, the lakes remained holy, for legends born of faith never truly die. They simply wait for the world to listen again. And in the hush before dawn, when wind brushes reeds and stars fade into pale sky, one can still feel the ancient truth of this place, that wealth lies not in what is taken, but in what is offered, not in accumulation, but in belonging, not in glitter, but in grace. What was wounded healed in time. What was lost did not vanish, it became memory. And memory, when held with reverence, becomes eternity. Time, patient as earth itself, softened the sharp echoes of conquest. Centuries passed across the Andes like slow-moving clouds. What had once been rumor and fever cooled into story, and what had once been story whispered in sacred valleys faded into myth for distant lands that never saw the sun gild Lake Guatavita at dawn. But myths do not die, they only sleep. And when they wake again, it is often in different hands, shaped not by ambition but by curiosity, not by hunger but by longing to understand. In later ages, when the world grew quieter in its desire to seize and louder in its wish to learn, scholars and seekers returned to these highlands. They did not come in armor or on restless horses. They arrived with notebooks, brushes, water flasks, and patience. They climbed winding paths not for gold, but for knowledge, not to conquer, but to listen. They gazed upon the lake not as treasure chest, but as ancient mirror, still, profound, breathing history into the clear air. They felt wind that had carried prayers for centuries. They walked the rim and saw reeds sway like gentle guardians, heard insects hum in warm sun, watched clouds settle on water as though sky itself wished to rest there. Many stood in silence, humbled by the thought that beneath this surface lay offerings untouched by greed, sleeping beneath layers of silt like dreams resting beneath memory. Archaeologists did not drain the lake. They studied its banks, its geology, its history. They traced faint scars in hillside where earlier hands had cut terraces. They examined clay figurines recovered long ago, their details softened by centuries of water, yet still holding the shape of devotion. They catalogued thin gold ornaments, emerald beads, ceramic vessels. They marveled not at wealth, but at meaning, at the craftsmanship, the symbolism, the patience, the quiet faith carved into each piece. Where once treasure seekers had seen only riches, these new explorers saw culture. They walked through highland fields and visited villages that still carried echoes of the old world. They listened to elders speak of ancestors who honored the sun with offerings, who believed lakes were living beings that held breath of gods. They watched rituals performed in hushed circles, firelight flickering on woven blankets, musicians breathing ancient rhythm through flutes carved from bone and reed. They learned gold had never been currency here, it had been prayer. Museums far away held some of the rediscovered offerings, displayed behind glass, each object resting beneath soft light. Visitors walked past and paused, seeing small figures of frogs and birds and sun discs, reading inscriptions that spoke not of empire but of faith. They stood before these relics and felt perhaps a spark of something old, a recognition that beauty not meant to be possessed holds power beyond possession. Anthropologists studied the Muisca's intricate knowledge of environment, how they farmed high-altitude fields, built canals to guide water without harming land, planted crops that nourished soil as much as people. They traced the trade networks across valleys, saw salt mines glimmering like ancient stars, found evidence of woven commerce built on trust and necessity, not ambition. They realized the Muisca world was not simple. It was sophisticated in ways different from empires that raised stone walls and armies. Where gold seekers once saw wilderness, modern scholars saw civilization. They uncovered evidence of complex religious calendars, astronomical alignments, ceremonial lakes mapped like constellations upon land. They studied tanjos, tiny metal figures once placed in sacred sites, and saw stories engraved in their forms. They examined emeralds not as jewels of greed, but as sacred symbols of life. The valley between mountain peaks became no longer myth but memory, recognized at last. Excavations near old temples revealed altars where resin and plant offerings had burned, and stones smoothed by countless hands kneeling in devotion. Scientists sifted through soil and found pollen grains from flowers used in rituals, seeds of crops grown with reverence, shells from distant coasts traded for meaning rather than wealth. Slowly, piece by piece, they reconstructed not the location of treasure, but the soul of a people. In time, the world came to understand that the Golden King was never sovereign of a glittering city. He was a figure of ritual, a man adorned in dust of the sun not to claim power but to give it back. The lake was not a vault, it was a shrine. The offering was not wealth, it was breath made luminous, devotion made visible. And the myth that rippled across oceans was never about gold, it was about light, about balance, about the human longing to touch the divine. Visitors now come to Lake Guatavita with quiet steps. They stand at the shore where mist curls in early hours, seeing mountains mirrored in water deep as memory. They hold silence not from fear, but from awe. Some close eyes and imagine the shimmer of dust falling from sacred skin, the whisper of priestly song drifting across still surface, the gentle thud of golden figurines sinking into depth like star falling into night. And in those moments, myth becomes real again, not as greed, but as grace. The lake no longer fears invasion, it receives reverence. Its edges cradle stories told with respect. Guides speak softly about the ceremony of the Golden King, about the Muisca world that honored sunlight rather than sought to hoard it. Researchers write not of riches stolen or found, but of cosmology, ritual, offering, and the sacredness of balance. In museums and libraries, the truth of El Dorado has changed shape. It is no longer city of gold, but a spiritual kingdom that lived in hearts and lakes and mornings touched by sacred dust. Gold has returned to its place not as treasure, but as symbol of what humans give back to the world when they recognize they belong to it, not above it. And in the land of the Muisca, people still gather by lakes. Some still toss petals into water instead of metal, honoring silence, honoring time, honoring sky. Some wear small pendants shaped like the tanjos of their ancestors, not for wealth but for remembrance. Children run barefoot again across fields, hair catching sunlight like gold dust rising into air. Elders tell stories at dusk as fire warms faces and stars awaken. The world breathes here, and those who listen hear history not as ruin, but as echo. Once, the Muisca offered gold to the gods. Now the world offers memory to the Muisca, and in this exchange, balance slowly returns, for truth, like the sun, rises even after long shadow. In the quiet breath of the modern world, where steel towers rise and rivers of light flow across cities at night, the legend of El Dorado still glimmers, but its shine has softened. What once burned like fever now glows like memory, gentle and distant, a reminder of how myth and misunderstanding once shaped destinies across oceans. Yet the Andes remain unchanged in spirit. Their slopes still cradle clouds as gently as a mother holds a sleeping child. Their peaks still catch first sunlight and turn it gold in a way no metal could ever rival. And in those highlands, where wind moves like prayer and lakes breathe calm, the truth of the Golden Kingdom has never dimmed, not because it waits to be found, but because it was never lost. Scholars now walk with reverence where conquerors once marched with hunger. They study earth not to reveal treasure, but to reveal context. Brushes replace blades. Silence replaces demands. Every fragment lifted from soil is treated as heartbeat, not prize. Each shard is gently wrapped, labeled not with greed but with gratitude. In laboratories far from these mountains, microscopes reveal grains of gold dust lodged in ancient fibers, not as wealth, but as witness. In archives, hands turn pages of weathered accounts, not to boast of discovery, but to understand where misunderstanding began, how myth grew teeth, why beauty was mistaken for bounty. And slowly, truth rises like sun over mountain ridges. El Dorado was never a city of metal. It was a ceremony of light, a moment when human forms shimmered in imitation of dawn, a devotion offered to sky in humble gratitude, a sacred practice, not a promise of riches. Modern minds, trained to measure and prove, find themselves humbled by this revelation. They discover that what was sought for centuries was not a kingdom built of gold bricks, but a way of seeing, a way of being. A reminder that there are cultures in the world where wealth is measured not in accumulation, but in balance, where beauty is not hoarded but shared, and where the most precious things are those returned to the earth. Anthropologists trace webs of trade that stretched like threads across mountain valleys. Salt traded for pottery, cotton for emeralds, coca leaves for obsidian blades. Through these networks, they see a civilization woven not by sword, but by reciprocity. The Muisca world was not silent simplicity. It was rich in ideas, in cosmology, in care for land and cosmos. A nation of poets in feathered cloaks, astronomers watching the rhythms of sky, artisans coaxing sunlight into form, priests reading ripples on sacred water as one reads scripture. Historians reconstruct the shape of rituals long faded from view. They map pilgrimage paths to lakes nestled between peaks. They reconstruct the rafts of woven reeds that once carried leaders into shimmering dawn. They imagine the hush that fell when gold dust was cast from skin into water, glimmering like stars falling into night. They feel awe, not desire, respect, not claim. Meanwhile, the descendants of those ancient people live still upon these mountains, walking the same paths their ancestors trod, speaking tongues that carry whispers of ancient hymns. They watch the world approach their past with reverence instead of greed, and they hold both pride and sorrow, sorrow for what was taken, pride for what endured. They welcome respectful pilgrims, guide researchers to lakes and ancient shrines, tell stories in soft tones at dusk about the time when humans gilded themselves not to rule, but to pray. Children sit at their grandparents' knees and learn not of golden cities lost to time, but of a people who loved the sun enough to return its light. They learn that true wealth does not weigh down hands but lifts hearts. They see offerings still placed in water at sunrise, not gold now, but petals, corn kernels, seeds, prayers whispered over ripples. The lake receives these with the same grace it once received metal. Water does not distinguish between offerings born of metal or memory. It hears only sincerity. Visitors stand on the ridge above Guatavita and feel something ancient stir, not greed, but humility. They sense the weight of centuries beneath their feet. They see that the water is not empty but full, full of meaning layered like sediment, full of devotion preserved not in vault but in silence. They realize the lake has not been defeated by history. It has endured history. It has watched men come with ambition and leave with emptiness. It has watched scholars come with questions and leave with reverence. And so the myth transforms once more, no longer a promise of riches, but a parable. A reminder that the human heart, when untethered from balance, can invent illusions bright enough to blind the world. A reminder that cultures misunderstood become wounds in memory, but also seeds, seeds that grow again when watered by understanding. Today, the legend of El Dorado rests gently in the world's imagination, no longer fevered but luminous, a story of how longing can mislead, and how truth, once uncovered, softens the edges of history. It lives in museum halls where tunjos stand under soft light like tiny prayers preserved in gold. It breathes in academic pages that speak of cosmology instead of conquest. It whispers across the Andes at dawn when sunlight touches lake water like a blessing renewed. El Dorado was never a place to be reached. It was always a reflection of devotion, of humility, of connection between humanity and the divine. And in this new understanding, the world finds treasure greater than any metal. For what shines brightest is not gold at the bottom of a lake, but the truth that rises when the heart finally learns to look with reverence instead of hunger. Night settles softly across the highlands, and the last light fades like gold dust dissolving into sacred water. The wind drifts slow through reeds along the lakeshore, stirring memories older than stone, older than hunger, older than any map drawn by human hand. Here, beneath a sky full of patient stars, the truth of El Dorado rests, not buried, not lost, only quiet. There was never a city of gold waiting to be claimed. There was only a world that honored light by returning it, a people who believed sunrise was wealth enough, a ceremony that shimmered not to dazzle, but to give. If one listens closely, just beyond the hush of reeds, echoes linger still, the soft rustle of garments brushed in gold powder, the steady breathing of those who knelt in devotion, the subtle splash of offerings sinking into water without a cry. Each sound floats as though suspended, like starlight caught on the edge of a dream. The lake remembers everything, not with bitterness but with stillness, not as wound but as witness. And though centuries have passed, the world now looks upon this place with gentler eyes. Scholars walk carefully. Descendants speak with dignity. Travelers arrive in silence, learning that some treasures are meant not to be taken, but to be felt, like warmth on skin at dawn, or the peace that comes when the heart accepts what it cannot possess. So the legend closes, not with a vault thrown open, but with a breath let go. The Golden Kingdom was never forged in metal. It lived in ritual, in gratitude, in the way sunlight rests upon water and becomes more than light. And in knowing this, the story returns to balance. For the greatest riches lie not in what we claim from the earth, but in what we give back to it. Tonight, the lake sleeps. The mountains watch, and somewhere in the depth of sacred water, gold rests quietly, not as treasure, but as prayer. Gold was sunlight given form, meant to honor the heavens, yet men chased it like hunger and lost themselves in its glow.